All right, guys, let's give it another 30 minutes. It's going to be another long chapter. Going to be in parts. I believe we're on chapter 9. The Trumps, the art of the deal, Wynn-Fall, the battle for Hilton. The battle for Hilton, Wynn-Fall. So another insightful business deal for Trump. The Wynn-Fall. In my wildest fantasy, it never occurred to me that I would someday purchase the huge casino hotel that the Hilton Hotels Corporation began building in Atlantic City in 1984. To the contrary, I watched with some dismay the progress of construction. I hardly relished another tough competitor in town, especially when the boardwalk hotel I owned with Harris wasn't performing well even against the existing competition. Worse yet, it was quite obvious that Hilton, after several years of indecision about Atlantic City, was finally going all out with a majority or with a major facility. To me, Hilton was a hard company to figure. It was founded in 1921 by Conrad Hilton, who built it into one of the great hotel chains in the world. Just some good knowledge to know. 1921, Conrad Hilton. His son Barron joined the company in the 1950s, and of course it was only a matter of time before he took over. It had nothing to do with merit, it's called birthright. In 1966, Conrad finally retired and Barron was named chief executive. So Barron the son. It's not easy to make your own mark on a company your father founded and built into a huge success. Some sons opt out altogether and don't even try to compete. Others are content to manage what their fathers have already built. A few sons set out to outdo their fathers at the same game, and that may be the toughest thing of all, particularly when the father's name is Conrad Hilton. Barron's first major responsibility back in 1959 was to run Hilton's carte blanche credit card business, which they just bought. He screwed it up, and carte blanche lost millions of dollars over the next 6 years. Hilton finally threw in the towel in 1966 and sold out to Citibank. In 1967, Barron convinced his father to sell Hilton's international hotel division to TWA in exchange for TWA stock, which was selling for about $90 a share. There was just one problem: OPEC. Almost immediately, oil prices started going through the roof, which devastated the airlines. Within 18 months, TWA stock had dropped by half, and by 1974 it was down to $5 a share. Until Carl Icahn took control of the company and turned it around recently, the stock was worth far less than it should have been. On the other hand, the international hotels that Hilton sold, which were recently sold again for close to $1 billion, did great business. They earned about $70 million in 1983, almost as much as Hilton earned from all its American hotels the same year. That's partly because Hilton, resting on its past reputation, had lost considerable ground in the luxury market to more aggressive competitors such as Marriott and Hyatt. The once great Hilton name ceased being synonymous with the best in hotels. Barron Hilton did make one decision that proved successful: getting into casino gambling. In 1972, Hilton purchased two Nevada casinos for about $12 million, the Las Vegas Hilton and Flamingo Hilton. Together, the two casinos began to account for a growing percentage of Hilton's profits: 30% in 1976, 40% in 1981, and 45%, or some $70 million, in 1985. Despite that success, Barron couldn't seem to make up his mind about Atlantic City. Hilton purchased a site at the marina around the time gambling was legalized, began moving forward, stopped suddenly, and then started again half-heartedly. By the time Hilton finally committed to construction in 1984, most of its major Nevada competitors, including Bally, Caesars, Harris, Sands, and the Golden Nugget, already had their facilities up, operating and earning huge profits in Atlantic City. I have to say this much for Hilton: having finally made the commitment, it left no doubt it was going all out. With an 8-acre site, one of the biggest in town, Hilton was determined to build on a grand scale. A huge, majestic entrance, ceilings 30 feet high, a 3,000-car self-park garage, Hilton described the project in its annual report as the largest undertaking in our history, with a casino of some 60,000 square feet and a 615-room hotel above it. The facility was comparable in size to Harrah's at Trump Plaza, which at the time was of the largest in town. The difference was that Hilton's master plan included a second phase expansion to some 100,000 feet of casino space and more than 2,000 guest rooms. Hungry to start recouping its investment as soon as possible, Hilton began construction at the same time and filed for a gaming license. So they made a mistake. As I explained earlier, the risk of getting turned down for a license midway through construction was the reason I'd gone after licensing first. But everyone else had done it Hilton's way, and I could understand Hilton's confidence about licensing. They were already in the game. But everyone else had done it. Okay. For starters, it was already licensed in Nevada. In addition, at a time when virtually no other construction was going on in Atlantic City, Hilton was making a huge investment in a mostly undeveloped part of town. Perhaps most important, in a business scarcely known for attracting Boy Scout companies, the Hilton name was about as all-American as you could hope to find. The licensing process seemed like little more than a formality for Hilton. The problem was that the Hilton people got a little too smug and full of themselves. They assumed they were doing Atlantic City a favor by coming to town, when in fact the licensing authorities see it just the opposite way. Hilton got a little too smug and full of themselves. The burden of demonstrating suitability for a license rests entirely with the applicant, no matter who it is. Hilton took the view that it was entitled to a license. It was a critical mistake. So the burden of demonstrating suitability for a license. So you gotta show, you gotta be proactive in showing them that you're suitable for a license, that you're a clean slate. You can't just assume they believe that. It was a critical mistake. Hilton took the view that it was entitled to a license. I began to hear rumblings that Hilton was in trouble early in 1985. Atlantic City is a very political town, and everyone who does business there knows that. Hilton, trying to be smart, hired a very political lawyer. On the face of it, that seemed like a savvy move. However, according to people I knew who were familiar with the Hilton licensing hearings, it may have backfired. The second mistake Hilton made was ignoring the experience of previous applicants. Playboy, for example, had been turned down for a license 3 years before. The reason, at least in part, was its past associations with a lawyer named Sidney Korsak, who supposedly had a history of organized crime connections. For 10 years, he'd also been on a retainer to Hilton at $50 a year to help negotiate labor disputes. I have no idea whether Korsak is a good guy or a bad guy, but the only issue that matters is pleasing the commissioners. They'd made it very clear that they didn't like Korsak. Instead of quietly severing the tie, Hilton kept Korsak on his retainer right up until the Division of Gaming Enforcement raised specific objections to him in mid-1984. Virtually the next day, Hilton fired Korsak. Barron later acknowledged to the commission that he'd taken the action only because we know how strongly you people feel about the matter. That was the worst thing he could have said. As one of the commissioners who voted against licensing Hilton put it later, the corporation apparently didn't get religion until it was pounding on the pearly gates of the censure. He said they weren't going to fire him if they would have kept him if we were cool with it, pretty much. It didn't help when Barron later testified that Korsak had never interceded on Hilton's behalf to prevent certain unions from striking Hilton's hotels. Within weeks of that testimony, Korsak wrote Barron a letter which he released to the media. It described in great detail exactly the work he'd done for Hilton in Las Vegas. It also included copies of letters Barron and Hilton had written thanking Korsak for his efforts. So another, pretty much considering him a liar. The end of Korsak's letter was devastating. "You have caused me irreparable harm," he wrote Barron, "and as long as I live, I will never forget that. When did I become a shady character? I imagine when you were having difficulty getting a license in Atlantic City. Hilton might have survived everything if Barron himself had taken the licensing hearings more seriously. Instead, he virtually ignored them. One of the few times he saw fit to show up in New Jersey was for his own testimony before the Casino Control Commission. Nor were any of his top corporate executives there for most of the hearings. What an idiot. What an idiot. Yeah, I could see how Trump was saying they felt entitled. On February 14, 1985, I was in my office when I got a phone call from a guy named Al Glasgow, who publishes a newsletter about the gaming industry called Atlantic City Action. Al is a true Damon Runyon character who lives and breathes gaming. He knows as much as anyone in town about who's doing what to whom. Did you hear about Hilton? Al asked. I said, no, what? And he said, they just got turned down for a license. So, Trump's a capitalizer, so capitalist, so it's opportunity. I thought he was kidding at first. Approval requires the concurrence of 4 commissioners. Hilton won a majority, but as was the case with Hugh Hefner, 3-2 in favor was a loss, not a win. In any case, Al said he suspected there was a possibility Hilton might just decide to put the facility up for sale rather than try to fight for a rehearing. I mean, yeah, they'd been sitting on it for a while. Hilton was scheduled to open the hotel in less than 12 weeks. They'd already hired more than 1,000 employees, and they were adding at a rate of approximately 100 people a day. By opening day, they'd have approximately 4,000 people on the payroll. With that payroll and no income coming in, you're talking catastrophe, no matter how big the company. At the very least, Hilton was under severe time pressure to get an appeal heard by the commission. Even so, I assumed that with more than $300 million already invested, they were going to do whatever they could to try to get licensed. After talking with Glasgow and a few other people in Atlantic City, I decided to call Baron Hilton out in California. As much as anything else, it was a condolence call. He couldn't help feeling sorry for the man. "Hi, Baron, how are you?" I said. Baron replied, not well at all. "I can imagine," I went on, "because what happened is just too bad. I've got to tell you, Donald," he said, "that I didn't expect it. It caught me totally by surprise." I told him that the move had caught everyone by surprise, and the conversation just went on like that. Before hanging up, I got to the business part of the call. "Look, Baron," I said, "I have no idea what you want to do with this facility, but if for some reason you're thinking of selling it, I'd be interested in buying it if the price is right." I mean, to walk away with no losses is better, right? Baron said he'd keep that in mind, and he thanked me for calling. I think he genuinely appreciated it. I also figured that was as far as things would get. Hilton already had plans to file for a rehearing, and I still believe that the commission would eventually reverse its decision. At the beginning of March, I got a call from a friend named Benjamin Lambert, who runs Eastdale Realty. I'd first met Lambert 10 years before when I was just beginning to look for a hotel chain partner for the Commodore Hotel deal. Hotel chain partner. He made some suggestions, and over the years, Ben and I worked on several deals together. We had our disagreements, but the bottom line was that we were friends. As it happened, Ben was a member of Hilton's board of directors. In the weeks after Hilton was turned down for a license, we talked a few times about the situation. Ben believed Hilton ought to seriously consider selling. On this occasion, Ben was calling to invite me to a party he was holding for the Hilton board at his townhouse. Prior to their annual meeting that week in New York. As he put it, "It's not an opportune time for you and Baron to meet about current events." It's not an inopportune time. Like it's not like it's a bad time. The board, it turned out, was deeply split about how to handle the Atlantic City situation. The Casino Control Commission had just agreed to the rehearing Hilton had requested on licensing. The Casino Control Commission. Nonetheless, several board members, including Ben, believed that it made more sense to sell the facility immediately if the right buyer could be found. Their argument was that if the commission didn't reverse itself and grant Hilton a license, the consequences could be truly disastrous for the company. By that point, a couple of months down the line, they'd been carrying several thousand employees. Worse, by selling the hotel under pressure, they might get a bad price. I went to the party and Ben introduced me to Baron. whom I never met in person. We ended up walking out to the garden and talking alone together. Once again, the conversation was non-specific. Mostly Barron vented his frustration about Atlantic City while I listened sympathetically. Barron is wary and reserved by nature. He's not the kind of guy who makes impulsive decisions, so I played it very low-key. We got along very well, and afterward I heard from Ben that Barron felt very comfortable with me. There are times when you have to be aggressive, but there are also times when your best strategy is to lie back. So he's reading the guy very well. Very shortly after that, Steve Wynn of the Golden Nugget decided to make a full-scale assault on Hilton, seeking control of the company. Steve Wynn, Golden Nugget. It was probably the best thing that could have happened to me. If it hadn't been for Wynn, I seriously doubt that Barron Hilton would ever have made a deal with me or anyone else for his Atlantic City hotel casino. He's like, oh shit, he's trying to take over. He sees us vulnerable, so let me just sell it. Let's just get something before it gets taken away from us, pretty much. At a loss. On April 14, Wynn wrote Barron a letter offering to buy a block of stock amounting to 27% of the entire Hilton company for $72 a share. At the time, the stock was trading for approximately $67 a share. Wynn also said he was prepared, if his initial offer was accepted, to pay the same $72 per share to all Hilton shareholders. So he wants to buy it all. Ironically, so he wants to buy the whole company. Ironically, Wynn could never have gone after the company at all if it hadn't been for Conrad Hilton. And I wonder why. When Conrad died in 1979, he totally screwed Barron, his son. There was no nicer way to say it. The assumption had been that Conrad would pass on his near-controlling interest in the company to Barron, or at the very least that he'd spread it among family members. Instead, Conrad Hilton used his will to disenfranchise his children and grandchildren. At the time of his death, Conrad's stock in Hilton was worth perhaps $500 million. But Conrad believed very strongly that inherited wealth destroys moral character and motivation. I happen to agree that it often does. It's kind of surprising coming from the guy that the world hates right now, right? To me, it makes sense to put money in trust for your children so they don't inherit millions of dollars when they turn 21. But Conrad took that view to a ridiculous extreme. He left Barron a token number of shares of stock, and he left each of his grandchildren a piddling $10,000 each. Nearly all the rest of his wealth, specifically his 27% share of the Hilton Corporation, he left to the Conrad N. Hilton Foundation. He ordered most of the earnings from the stake to be used to support the charitable work of Catholic nuns in California. Fuck those nuns, dude. Well, I don't know. Because at the end of the day, they're living an unselfish life, nuns are, honestly. The result was to make Barron just another high-level corporate manager who lacked the power of a major stockholder. I'm highlighting the part where Trump says, to me, it makes sense to put money in trust for your children so they don't inherit millions of dollars when they turn 21. So I'm pretty sure like a trust, there's some stipulations and there's some guidelines. Like, okay, if he's fucking out on drugs or something by the time he's 40, he's living a decent life, let's give him the rest of the money. The result was to make Barron just another high-level corporate manager who lacked the power of a major stockholder. Even with the stock options that he exercised over 10 years as chief executive, Barron still owned only a tiny percentage of the company by 1985. What Barron did was to enter into litigation, seeking control of the foundation's shares. His chances of winning the case, which had dragged on for years, were uncertain. For one thing, he had the sort of adversaries you want to avoid in a litigation. Nuns and priests of the Catholic Church. Conrad's will had specified that if for any reason the foundation was unable to accept his stock bequest, Barron had the right to purchase the stock at its market value as of 1979. Federal law prohibits charitable foundations and their affiliated parties from together owning more than 20% of a public company. Therefore, Barron could legitimately argue that he was entitled to purchase for himself the 7% of the foundation's shares that were in excess of the foundation's allowable 20%. But Barron tried to take his claim much further. Basically, he tried to argue that for Byzantine legal reasons, he was entitled to buy out the foundation's entire stake. Moreover, by buying its stock for the 1979 price of 24 and 5/8 at a time when the stock was trading around 72, in effect he'd be paying 170 million for 500 million worth of stock. Moreover, by buying its stock for the 1979 price of 24 and 5/8 at a time when the stock was trading around 72, I get it. So he's buying it. He's buying it for what it was worth in 1979 as opposed to 1984 or whatever it is at this time. It's called a great deal. It may also be called trying to rewrite your father's will. My strong suspicion is that Barron knew his chances of winning the litigation were questionable. More to the point, if he couldn't get control of the stock, he was in a far weaker position to fend off Steve Wynn or any hostile takeover threat. Finally, so long as he held on to his Atlantic City facility but remained unlicensable, he was also highly vulnerable to shareholder lawsuits. Finally, so long as he held on to his Atlantic City facility but remained unlicensable, because if they start losing money, they're going to sue his ass for not running the company properly. So this will be in two parts, I'm pretty sure. We'll just go to the maybe bottom. I have no doubt how I would have reacted if I had been Barron Hilton. I would have fought Steve Wynn and his takeover threat, and I would also have fought for my license at the rehearing. I'm not saying I would also have won, but if I went down, it would have been kicking and screaming. I would have closed the hotel and let it rot. That's just my makeup. I fight when I feel I'm getting screwed, even if it's costly and difficult and highly risky. But then I wasn't running a public company, so I didn't have to worry constantly about Wall Street and shareholders in the next quarterly earnings report. The only person I had to please was myself. In the end, I think Barron decided that he just wasn't prepared to fight on two fronts at the same time, for licensing as well as for control of his company. And of the two, control of the company obviously came first. Steve Wynn helped me in two ways. By pursuing a takeover, he put Barron on the defensive and kept him from focusing on his relicensing hearings. At the same time, the more Wynn's aggressive style offended Barron, the more likely it was that Barron would turn to me as a white knight. So, how Trump would have fought. I would have fought Steve Wynn in his takeover threat, and I would also have fought for my licensing at the rehearing. That's just my makeup. I fight when I feel I'm getting screwed, even if it's costly and difficult and highly risky. I would have closed the hotel and let it rot. He wasn't running a public company, right? Trump. I wasn't running a public company. He didn't have no shareholders, board of directors. Steve Wynn helped me in two ways. Barron was on the defensive, kept him from focusing on just one building and trying to get licensing. He was trying to save his whole company. Turned to me as a white knight. It's not a role I'm accustomed to, but Wynn played right into my hand. Wynn grew up in his father's bingo parlor, the son of a compulsive gambler. Wynn played right into my hand. Wynn grew up in his father's bingo parlor, the son of a compulsive gambler. Shots fired right there. Trump has some powerful enemies, bro. But he's playing a powerful game, so there's some powerful people on his side as well. Later, he made the right friends in Las Vegas, managed to buy a small stake in the Golden Nugget Hotel, and eventually took over. Later, he made the right friends in Las Vegas, managed to buy a small stock in the Golden Nugget. And then eventually took over. His entire world has been Las Vegas and Atlantic City and gaming. But there's something he lacks, I'm pretty sure. He's got a great act. He's a smooth talker. He's perfectly manicured. And he's invariably dressed to kill in $2,000 suits and 200 silk shirts. The problem with Wynn is that he tries too hard to look perfect, and a lot of people are put off by him. Barron was one. Wynn's aggressive style offended Barron. The more likely it was that Barron would turn to me as a white knight. Anyway, we'll just stop it right there, guys, and just do another video. Because we have about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. How much did I read so far? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. We'll just do another video, guys. I think it's better that way. Peace.